All right, let's jump into another deep dive.
Okay.
And today we're looking at
Mm-hmm.
the Battle of Shiloh.
Yeah.
And we've got,
A big one.
we do, a big one.
Yeah.
We've got excerpts from online articles. We've got a staff ride handbook.
Right.
And even a blog post from the National Portrait Gallery.
Wow. Okay.
So we're going to try to uncover all the things,
Right.
the major events and players, but also dig into some of the lesser-known details and controversies.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So should we just get right into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So Shiloh, really, it kind of,
It's one of those battles.
it's a turning point.
Yeah, shattered the illusion that the war would be short, relatively bloodless, really changed things.
Absolutely. So to kind of set the stage,
Okay.
it's April 1862. So
Hmm.
still early in the war.
Mm-hmm.
The fighting is focused in the Western Theater,
Right.
and both sides are vying for control of this place.
Corinth.
Corinth, Mississippi.
Yeah, Corinth was a crucial rail hub. Whoever controlled it controlled the flow of troops and supplies.
It was strategically vital.
Yeah.
And so the Union forces were led by Grant, Sherman, and Buell. Facing them were Johnston, Beauregard, Bragg, and Polk for the Confederacy.
You know, it's interesting. A lot of those commanders, they knew each other before the war. Polk and Davis were at West Point together, Johnston and Sherman. They knew each other from the Mexican-American War.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, it adds like a personal layer to the conflict.
Wow, yeah, almost like a bad reunion or something.
Yeah, a military reunion gone wrong,
Exactly.
which is essentially what happened. So on the first day of the battle, dawn, April 6th, the Confederates launched this surprise attack, and they catch the Union troops completely off guard.
They were eating breakfast. Some of them were still in their tents.
Yeah, totally unprepared.
Yeah, talk about shattering any remaining illusions about the nature of war. Nobody was expecting that.
It's wild. One of the sources we looked at recounts the experience of this young private, Henry Stanley.
Henry Stanley, didn't he? Later on.
Yeah, famous explorer.
Sector Livingston. Yeah, Dr. Livingston, I presume.
Yeah.
He was actually fighting for the Confederacy at Shiloh.
Oh, wow.
And he talks about just the shock of seeing his first casualties.
Great.
And really how quickly the romanticism of war can disappear when you are confronted with that reality.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. The fighting was especially fierce around this sunken farm road that became known as the Hornet's Nest.
Yeah, the Hornet's Nest. You're talking about intense, close quarters combat,
Yeah.
a brutal struggle for every inch of ground.
Yeah. And this is where some of the controversial figures of the battle emerged.
Oh, right. Like who?
Benjamin Prentiss.
Oh, Prentiss.
He was a Union general who became known as the hero of the Hornet's Nest.
Ah.
But recent scholarship has challenged that, suggesting that he may have actually taken credit for actions taken by others.
Oh, wow.
And the people that could dispute those claims didn't survive.
Oh, that's interesting. So how do the narratives get shaped after these events? You know, how accounts can differ based on who survives. Makes you wonder.
For sure. The battle also exposed critical weaknesses in how both sides communicated. Several missed opportunities and blunders that had a big impact on the fighting.
Like what?
So on the first day, Lew Wallace, a Union general, he's supposed to reinforce Sherman's lines.
Okay.
But his arrival was delayed.
Why was that?
Orders were unclear, led to delays and confusion.
He was wandering around in the middle of a battle.
Yeah, essentially trying to figure out where he was supposed to be while the battle was raging.
Oh my gosh.
And then on the Confederate side, Nathan Bedford Forrest, brilliant cavalry commander, he correctly identifies Buell's reinforcements arriving.
Okay.
But his reports are dismissed by his superiors.
Ah, so communication breakdowns on both sides.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder how things could have unfolded differently.
Right. If Wallace arrived on time or if Forrest's warnings had been heeded.
Totally. Shiloh also highlights this huge shift in military technology and tactics.
With the rifled muskets, right?
Yeah, rifled muskets.
It's like the technology had advanced, but the tactics hadn't. The officers were still using those strategies from the Napoleonic Wars, you know, suited for smoothbore muskets.
So they're fighting this new kind of war with an old rule book.
Exactly.
So you have soldiers with these incredibly accurate long-range rifles.
Right.
But they're fighting in close formations.
Yeah, that's not going to end well.
Devastating casualty rates.
Yeah, rifled muskets made defensive positions really strong. This is kind of foreshadowing trench warfare.
Wow.
But in a way, nobody could have anticipated at the time.
Right. So after the Hornet's Nest falls, Grant's forces, they make this desperate stand on the final day of Pittsburgh Landing.
Okay.
And they're supported by artillery. They've even got naval gunfire from Union gunboats.
Wow.
The scene at the landing was just utter chaos, though.
Yeah.
Routed Union troops fleeing towards the river, and the wounded soldiers from both sides, they're crawling to this pond for water,
Oh, gosh.
which turns crimson.
Oh, so that's why they call it Bloody Pond.
Yeah, bloody pond. It's just this really horrifying scene.
Yeah. Hard to imagine the chaos.
Really hard to comprehend the sheer horror of that day. And the battle wasn't over yet.
Right. We'll come back to that. So Grant's forces are clinging to Pittsburgh Landing. The situation was looking pretty dire.
But Buell's reinforcements arrived during the night,
Okay, yeah.
which provided a much-needed boost to Union manpower and morale.
Yeah, fresh troops. Always good.
Always good.
So what happened next?
By the morning of April 7th, the tide had turned. Grant launched a counterattack, and the Confederates, now outnumbered and exhausted,
Yeah.
they were forced to retreat.
It was a Union victory then.
It was a Union victory,
Okay.
but at a staggering cost.
How many casualties are we talking?
Over 23,000 total.
Wow.
Shiloh became the bloodiest battle in American history up to that point.
It's hard to even imagine.
Yeah.
So this really marked a turning point in the war, didn't it?
A grim turning point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shattered any remaining hope of the swift resolution.
Nobody was expecting this kind of bloodshed.
No. One source describes the battlefield afterward as just an unimaginable scene of carnage.
I bet.
Bodies everywhere. And the water in the pond had literally turned red from the blood of the wounded.
That's horrific.
Really hard to comprehend.
Shiloh really forced the nation to confront the brutal reality of this conflict.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just about the physical wounds, but the profound psychological impact on those who witnessed it.
How did the leaders on both sides even begin to adapt to this new, more brutal kind of warfare?
They had been trained in Napoleonic tactics,
Right.
which were rapidly becoming obsolete with the rifled muskets and entrenched defenses.
So Shiloh exposed that disconnect between the existing military doctrine and this new reality of the weapons.
Absolutely.
One of the sources, a staff ride handbook.
Okay.
It details the evolution of tactics during the war.
Interesting.
And it points out that some commanders experimented with more open formations
Oh, okay.
as a way to adapt.
Trying to spread out a bit more.
Right, right.
Mm.
But these adaptations were often piecemeal, not a systemic overhaul.
Right, so attacking entrenched positions head-on, even with those adjustments, was still incredibly costly.
Exactly. And the handbook also highlights the challenges of command and control
Oh, sure.
in these large battles.
That would be chaos.
Units could get separated easily, orders delayed or lost in the chaos.
Yeah.
And these breakdowns, they contributed to the heavy losses at Shiloh.
I bet those command and control challenges would continue to plague both sides throughout the war.
Absolutely. Shiloh really foreshadowed those large-scale bloody battles that would become even more common later in the war.
Yeah, like Gettysburg and Vicksburg.
Yeah.
Same hallmarks of Shiloh.
High casualties.
Yeah.
And the struggle to adapt to the changing nature of warfare.
Beyond the immediate tactical lessons, Shiloh also had a significant impact on the course of the war.
In what way?
It dispelled any remaining illusions of a quick, decisive conflict.
Right.
And the nation was forced to face the prospect of a long and bloody struggle.
And we've talked about the fighting and the casualties, but it's also important to consider those medical challenges
Oh, right.
faced at Shiloh.
You.
This was before antibiotics, before modern sanitation practices.
Yeah, you had thousands of wounded men with horrific injuries from mini balls.
Yeah,
Overwhelmed the medical services on both sides.
absolutely.
Yeah.
One source mentions that amputation was the most common procedure performed at the field hospitals.
Wow.
It was often the only way to prevent infections from turning fatal.
A grim reminder of the human cost of war beyond the numbers that we see in the casualty reports.
Absolutely. It's also interesting to think about the impact on the surrounding communities.
Like Corinth?
Yeah. Corinth, for example, became a major hospital center for the Confederacy after Shiloh.
Oh, wow.
Civilians were thrust into the role of caregivers, dealing with this overflow of wounded soldiers.
So the effects of the battle rippled outward, touching the lives of those far beyond the battlefield.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So after 2 days of intense fighting, a narrow Union victory, a staggering number of casualties, what were the long-term consequences of Shiloh, and how did it shape the course of the war? We'll explore those questions as we wrap up our deep dive into the Battle of Shiloh. Okay, so we've covered the lead up to the Battle of Shiloh, the intense fighting, the staggering casualties, and the immediate aftermath. What were the long-term consequences? How did this battle shape the course of the Civil War?
Well, Shiloh had a profound impact. Strategically, and in terms of how both sides viewed the conflict, it shattered those lingering illusions of a swift and bloodless war.
Yeah, one source even goes as far as to say, after Shiloh, the South never smiled again.
Wow, that's
Ugh,
pretty purpose.
That's a powerful statement.
It is. And this was still relatively early in the war, too.
Right, really a foreshadowing of the even larger, more devastating battles that were yet to come.
Absolutely. How did Shiloh affect military strategies going forward? Did commanders adapt? Well, it forced them to confront the realities of this new type of warfare. Rifled muskets, as we talked about, had dramatically increased the effectiveness of defensive positions, made those old Napoleonic tactics pretty much useless.
Yeah, those tactics proved disastrous at Shiloh.
Exactly. And if you think about it in the broader context of military history, Shiloh is a key example of how technological advancements can outpace tactical innovation, leading to a really bloody period of adjustment.
So both sides had to relearn how to fight a war.
Yeah, basically. They had to reconsider their entire approach. And this led to a greater emphasis on field fortifications, flanking maneuvers, and the use of combined arms tactics.
So using infantry, artillery, and cavalry together more effectively.
Right.
What about morale? We know the Confederates were initially confident, expecting a quick victory. How did Shiloh change that?
The loss at Shiloh, coupled with the death of their commander, Albert Sidney Johnston, really hit Confederate morale hard. It showed them that victory would not come easy and that the Union was a determined and formidable opponent.
Shiloh also had very real strategic implications. It was fought for control of Corinth, Mississippi, a vital rail hub. What happened there?
Well, it did take some time for the Union to finally capture Corinth, but Shiloh essentially stopped the Confederate advance in the West, gave the Union a firmer foothold, and paved the way for future campaigns deeper into Confederate territory.
So in many ways, Shiloh was a microcosm of the war itself.
I think that's a great way to put it.
It was brutal, costly, and strategically important. It revealed the shortcomings of existing tactics and highlighted the need for adaptation. It forced the nation to confront the long and bloody road ahead.
And it left behind a legacy of questions, controversies, reminding us that history is rarely neat and tidy. There are always multiple perspectives, lingering what-ifs, and of course the human cost to consider.
As we reflect on Shiloh, what stands out to you as the most significant takeaway from this battle?
For me, Shiloh was a turning point. It was a brutal wake-up call for both sides, foreshadowing the long and bloody conflict that lay ahead for the entire nation. And the lessons learned, both in terms of tactics and the human cost of war, they would continue to resonate throughout the rest of the war and beyond.
Absolutely. This deep dive has uncovered some really fascinating insights into the Battle of Shiloh, from the major events and key figures to the lesser-known controversies and enduring legacies. We encourage you to explore further, to look at those primary sources, and to consider those multiple perspectives surrounding this pivotal moment in American history. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Battle of Shiloh.